And a filled studio today because we have a special guest, Rafael Pizano. So good to see you today.
Likewise. Good to be in the studio with you guys today.
You're a special guest of the show because this is what, your third time on the show?
Third time it is. I'm honored.
Third time's the charm now.
Yep.
And we've really built this one up. I mean, this is going to be a big one. This is kind of the culmination of what we've been talking about with folks the last couple of times that you've been on. And I'm so appreciative that you've been willing to come in here, Rafael, and share your knowledge base. A lot of that comes from research that you've actually done on your own time to try to understand these issues of Cuba and the relationship between Cuba and America, and particularly how that affects the Tampa Bay area, because that's
absolutely
a big story.
I mean, from traveling overseas to Brussels, the Czech Republic, Eastern European countries that had the fall of communism, even to Latin America, it's unique to be here, hometown, to share it with people. You know, this is my hometown. It's very special. But I also don't have to catch a flight. I'm right here to share this news.
And we're glad to have you. And you're a freedom fighter. You did your time in the U.S. military.
Yes, sir.
You're airborne
Infantry.
And you have got a really storied career there. You're born and raised in America, but you came from a family that was Cuban dissidents, essentially, under the Castro regime. So your dad was anti-communist, and he actually took up arms in Cuba and wound up getting captured. Not only because they actually shot him was he captured. I'm sure if they hadn't shot him and actually knocked him out, because it was a headshot that just grazed him, but it knocked him out. And that was how they actually were able to capture him, because I get the feeling, having met you and gotten to know you, I get the feeling your dad would not have been easy to capture.
It's in the bloodline, and he was a senior bearer of this whole struggle. But, yeah, that's how they got him. A gunshot to the head, it grazed him. He went down, passed out, and that's where he was captured.
Mm-hmm.
That armed struggle, they struggled in every way that they could, and they took arms to go up against communism. But once you let that cancer in, it's hard to get it out of a country.
Yeah, and we see that cancer being let into our country, and it's spreading. We can see it spreading in our country. And one of the things that we're going to get into today that we mostly want to talk about is how it's spreading here in the Bay Area through these connections with Cuba. But before we do that, I'm sure we've got some folks that haven't heard your whole story, and we're not going to retell the whole story because we've done that a couple of times. But why don't you just give us a few of the examples of what it's like? And your dad, by the way, spent 18 years in a Cuban communist prison, and he suffered under their torture, their effects at mind control, which is called trauma-based mind control, and you've shared some of those stories with us. Give us a few of those stories as our quick look back to get folks up to speed on what it's like to be captured and held in a communist prison.
Well, for me, it began, obviously, I was born here. I was the first generation American born. My family came in exile. They had to flee communism. My father took up arms against communism in his native land of Cuba. I grew up around a lot of gentlemen that were former political prisoners that the U.S. were able to barter out of there in a time that the Cuban communists were under a lot of pressure, so the world had their sights on communism and a problem in Latin America. So the communists had no choice. They had to give up several thousand of these political prisoners. 3,600 came with my father, and they're spread out throughout the country. Some went to other countries. They ended up organizing when they got here in the 80s and 90s. They ended up going to Geneva, talking at The Hague. They presented cases. They were able to get thousands of cases looked at by the United Nations and condemned. They actually, the Geneva condemned the Castros for what they did, for false executions, kangaroo courts, and torture. There were many more still left, but nonetheless, that was their legacy that they were doing after they were released from prison. I ended up picking up the torch years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, traveled to the European Union, Eastern European countries, and learning about their experience, and it actually brought to light more the facts that were coming out of Cuba for so many decades, which was the torture programs, the indoctrination, or what they call re-education. So I ended up traveling to Latin America and other nations as well. For my father, the experience was similar to other communist countries where they torture you. They call it re-education, but they put you in these gulags. And the world didn't know about it or didn't want to almost believe it because it's so surreal. But I believed it myself, not only from hearing their stories, but traveling to other former communist countries that fell after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And you start to hear these things, and they're so comparison. They're the same stories were coming out.
Yeah.
There's stories, for example, of the torture methods. They would psychologically try to break you. There was a gentleman that was tortured. They threw him in a cell by himself, solitary confinement, and he was on a Christian network here years ago telling his story. So these were his words on something that I saw here in the U.S. he heard heavy breathing in this dark cell, and he didn't know what it was because he was still semi-unconscious. And he realized after some time that there was a bear in the cell with him.
My goodness.
So he became a born-again Christian pretty much because he was on a Christian network channel, and he said he prayed all night. All night he would pray because this beast was just breathing beside him, and he just realized that the most unspeakable things could possibly happen if that bear decided to attack him. But he says no, he had his faith in Christ and the Lord, and the bear didn't attack him.
Wow.
But it must have been just a crazy experience that they'll toss you in a cell with a bear just to break you.
Yeah.
Just to make you change your mind about the system. There was other stories where you were tied up by your hands naked, and they'll have a police-type canine, a German shepherd, and they'll be making so many noise and smacking you, and your hands are tied, you're naked, and they keep teasing like they're going to throw the dog towards you. Once they would release that canine, it would go straight for your private areas.
Woo.
But the dog didn't have any teeth. Point of the story was they wanted to psych you out. So they'll psych you out with this dog that had no teeth. You didn't know. You thought the dog had teeth and he was going to shred your private parts to pieces. But nonetheless, there were no teeth. It's weird things that you would say, who thinks of these things? Who takes the time to invest thinking in these just malicious ideas?
They're malicious, and they want to actually just torture your mind. In addition, that's the big thing. It's just mind control, mind games that they're doing.
Absolutely. That way, if you ever talk about against the system, people just say, oh, he's just crazy. You could tell in his eyes, he's just crazy. Of course, the things that they do to you were to try to break you. But most of these men that I've met, all of them, have impressed me because they've always had a faith in God uniquely. I don't know how I would handle the situation. I have my faith in God, my personal faith. I respect all faiths. But it must be just amazing to have a faith, a true faith like that despite going through all those horrific things, that you still have faith in God.
You described that as being one of the things that helped people get through this. And then with your father, I remember some remarkable stories about how he was able to have a strong mind to get through his situation.
Absolutely. I mean, these guys would just go within, so to speak, and they maintained their virtues, their belief in morals, and held on to those principles, and they were willing to die for them. I mean, my father, one of the stories is they took 7 or 8 men out to execute. So they're executing one man in front of another, tying them to the firing post, and they'll execute you. Ready and fire. Ready and fire. Next guy. Third guy. Fourth guy. And he counted these wooden caskets that they were putting the men in, and they had enough for all of them, including him. So once they get to the last guy, he's coming up. He saw all those guys executed right in front of him. Yeah. So now it's his turn. He's the last guy. And they tied him on the post. Ready, aim, fire. Blanks. So they waited to the last time to get him to psych him out.
Mm-hmm.
He witnessed all that. He thought it was for sure, and they used blanks.
Yeah.
Then they'll take you back to your cell.
Well, that's part of that trauma-based mind control, right? Where they put you under such severe psychological trauma that it breaks your mind. It actually can cause a fracturing of your personality. We know people that have experienced that. Sometimes they develop from that multiple personalities syndrome and other mental disorders from that kind of stress that they're under.
Absolutely.
Well, that's thank God we don't have that in this country, but then we take a moment and we look at things like what's going on in Canada, and we see that the police are going in and they're seizing these emergency powers, and they're arresting citizens for what are completely peaceful protests. There were literally 0 acts of violence that were caused by the truckers up in Ottawa and the rest of Canada, but they're going to take those people and they're going to do things like they're going to freeze and seize their bank accounts without them even being charged, without a trial. They're talking about, if we come and we take your truck, we arrest you because you're an illegal protester. I mean, can you believe that? They have the right to protest in Canada, but they think if we come in and we arrest you because you're a protester and you have your dog in the truck with you, we will take your dog, but then 8 days later we will euthanize your dog. In other words, they're going to kill your dog for being at this protest. That's the message that they're pushing out, and that's this kind of trauma-based mind control where you're trying to essentially break people's psychological will, cause them no longer to support the causes of freedom and the other causes that they support, just because you're essentially going to scare it out of them with fear, and you're going to use these techniques that really amount to torture. We'll be right back.
And we're back on the Morgan Streetman Show with a very special guest today with us, Morgan. So thank you for bringing in once again Rafael Pizano. So great to see you.
Good morning again.
And I do have to say, we're listening to these stories about what your father went through, the torture in the communist Cuban camps. And when you see what happened there, you have to look at what was going on, what has happened historically, and espionage that's taken place involving Cuban diplomats here in our country.
Absolutely.
And one example of that is the Maria Montes case. And you explained some of that last time while you were here. If you could go through that again, because that really shows how entrenched these people are.
Maria Montes, she's in prison. She's been she's well past 15 years probably by now.
She'll get out actually next January.
Next January.
January 2023, she'll be released.
So she's beyond the 15-year mark.
She's I think 17 or so. Yeah, thereabouts.
Okay. And anybody can look up Maria Montes, Montes. So Maria Montes was working at the highest levels, top secret TSI clearance for the State Department. She was briefing even our famous patriot, Colin Powell, which we all know his history is impeccable and the levels which he reached in the U.S. government. She was briefing him. So he was relying on Maria Montes for some of his briefings and intel briefings. They recruited her in her university days. They polished her up to that level where she had the top secret TSI clearances. She was briefing Colin Powell, and it turns out she was later found guilty of espionage, and she was working for the Cuban communists. The damage that she's done, or how many lives she's probably affected, because we had soldiers deployed, special forces in Latin America at that time, and she had information from that region of deployments and so forth. So the damage is extensive, but nonetheless, it's that this little country, people think, oh, they can't do anything. What kind of military? What would they do to us? We'll have them, by lunchtime, we'll be done with them. And we would. They have no real strength military-wise. I mean, on their own people, yeah, it's strong. But for a war against us, nothing. But their war is different. It's information warfare. It's intelligence trafficking, human trafficking. Not human trafficking, intel trafficking. I'm stuttering here. And the level of penetration they're able to achieve. We got to remember, this small island, they were groomed by the most notorious intelligence service in the world, the former Soviet KGB. They were groomed for decades, to the point that KGB said, hey, you guys are doing just as good a job as us. We're just going to lease you in a way, and we'll pay you for the information, and that's how we're going to do it, or we're going to barter for the intel you provide us. So that's how far she got there, and that's just one of others that's penetrated at that level.
Well, and that would have been around the time when she got caught, was around the time that Hugo Chavez was coming to power in Venezuela. So you just have to wonder, in terms of our American response to that change in Venezuela, how much information was she able, and other people, because Maria Montes is just somebody that we know about because she got caught. And for every one that gets caught, I'm going to guess there's probably 20 to 100 that are operating that don't get caught.
Absolutely. And if you look on some of these websites, when you pull up her name, you'll see a lot of information out there, and you'll realize where one is caught. That's absolutely correct. There's a network. They don't work by themselves. There's a network. But that network works very discreetly. They know how to operate. They're professionals. So they kind of turn into the wallflower, so to speak, and they can't find them as easy. But when they got her, rest assured there was other people in that department, the State Department, that are still probably active.
Yeah, and the individual operatives are always managed by a handler, just like our own. That's the way our own intelligence service works. I assume that's the way all intelligence services work. And her handler even got caught out of this deal, and he wound up getting thrown out of the country. You told us a little bit about that last time.
Well, we got Gustavo Machín. He was the top Cuban communist regime diplomat here. He was in Washington. He would travel throughout the United States, which technically he should have not been allowed to. He should have been restricted, as they used to under the Bush administration. Nonetheless, Gustavo Machín, the Cuban head diplomat, was expelled from the U.S. persona non grata, a real fancy term to say, hey, you've got diplomatic immunity, but we know what you're doing. You got to get out now. And Josefina Vidal, another top diplomat, was expelled as well. She was the one that led the talks when Obama went to Cuba. So the spy that was kicked out for leading a spy network was the one that led. They put her as the front runner when Obama went to Cuba. It was sort of like a smack in the face to us.
Yeah.
So when you've got those top diplomats leading networks and they're kicked out, they were leading a spy network. That's how big they are. And when you got these diplomats traveling around the country, especially at Tampa, there's a possible danger for our city and town.
Well, and when we see our local politicians travel down to Cuba, they get photographed with these people. Like you said, sometimes these people are leading different little conferences and get together because, of course, when any politician goes down there, they get the red carpet treatment. I mean, they don't see what it's like to be a real Cuban living in Cuba, making approximately $30 a month.
Correct, and the communists know that. They know that most of the people are going to see 5% of the island, and that 5% is a beautiful part of the island. You're going to see this Castillos, this Spanish fort, and it is beautiful. I have friends that have gone, a few family members that still have gone, and there's innocence to some of that travel because you're just trying to understand the island, but a lot of people don't know the in-depth politics and how it supports the regime. So I'm not judgmental of my friends or my family that go. I just try to raise awareness so they know some of the other stuff, the other 95% of the island, how they really live, how physician makes less than a young girl that unfortunately has to prostitute herself to make money off some stranger that comes from Europe or the U.S. or Canada. A lot of people don't know those things that happen. They do. Now, for our politicians here, the Cubans try to network. The regime tries to network. So since those diplomats used to travel around the United States before they were expelled, they still have their network working here. They try to entice people to go. Who do they try to entice mainly? Not just tourists, but low-level functioning politicians. What do I mean by that? Not a senator or a congressman, because at those levels, it's harder for them to kind of network. It's not as easy, even though they do try to make the effort. But like city politicians, city councilmen, people that have no significance, they bring them out, like you said, give them the red carpet treatment. They meet some high-level people in Cuba, and they're like, wow. They come back, with their egos boosted. They stroke their ego pretty well. They also try to appeal to business investors because they know they're influential in inner circles in certain places. So if they invite some of our business investors, when they come back, they have an influence in town with the local politicians, with the business investors, and they start to work out from that inner circle and start to gain their influence.
Well, and they also target university students and universities, so they try to develop different faculty members and create programs for cross-cultural understanding. These are all things to get a foothold in a local community and to start affecting the younger generation. And I know you're familiar with even some things that have gone on here locally with one of our local universities that they've infiltrated.
Well, I have declassified information, which was a federal FBI report that gave their overview, their risk assessment, and they've covered how Cuba's regime works again. They're not their military, their intelligence is how they work. So they appeal to academia. So they get these cultural programs, they use fancy terms that are hip nowadays, and they take advantage of something that could have been good, but they use it to get their foot in the door, the wolf in the hen house. So once they get in that way, they start to recruit. Remember, Maria Montes made it all the way to have one of the highest clearances in our government, giving intel reports to Colin Powell. They recruited her in her university days. Mm-hmm. They were inviting her to Cuba. They were doing all that there. So that's where they start to get people, and then they organically grow them out. And Tampa has one of the only programs in the United States that has a director directly from Cuba's education department, which anybody that works for Cuba's regime abroad is part of the Cuban Communist Party, and PCC.
Yeah, and you're talking about the University of Tampa, right in downtown Tampa, Florida.
Correct, University of Tampa, a very historic, beautiful university. Theodore Roosevelt stayed there on his way down to the Spanish-American War, has a beautiful history. It's a great university with a lot of great academia, yet I am surprised that program was there, and I'm surprised no risk assessment was done. I think it was done, it was encouraged too quickly, and they didn't do the right legwork. And I think even today they need to kind of go back and say, hey, should we do a risk assessment considering there's FBI reports that have come out on this, that we could be a target or our young students could be exposed to something that's not ethical.
So we talk about the Tampa Bay area, and you use that as an example. There's one right there. And then, Tampa really is a place that Cuban politicians are trying to target. Why?
If you look at Miami, they have Miami, we joke around and say it's like the other capital of Cuba. Instead of Havana, it's Miami, Florida. There's a lot of Cubans there. Their foothold is stronger. We have the third largest Cuban exile community here in Tampa, yet they come here because the politicians aren't as well informed. Most politicians in South Florida are, so they'll tell other people, hey, you need to be careful because they're enticing you. They're trying to do this and this. We have a history, a track record of seeing this. But in Tampa, since so many people are unaware at the political level, they're easily enticed. So that's why they're coming to Tampa. And in Tampa, let me tell you, it's center stage. Tampa's center stage on this. I've talked to retired colonels that were specifically U.S. Army retired counterintelligence, specifically to Cuba. This gentleman, Colonel Simmons, Chris Simmons, has a website, cubaconfidential.wordpress. You'll see amazing things in relation to their activity here in the U.S. And again, he was counterintel Cuba.
Well, it's hard to believe they're getting a foothold here in the Bay Area, but when we come back on the other side of the break, because I hear the music running now, one of the things we want to get into with you is the fact that they're actually still working, and they've been working now for a better part of a decade on trying to bring a Cuban consulate to Tampa. That's kind of like an embassy, but it's not in the capital city, right? So if there was an embassy, it'd be in Washington, but if there was another embassy-like structure in another city, that would be called a consulate. And we saw that, for instance, with the Chinese Communist Party and China. They had a consulate in Houston, which is where you would actually go to get your visa to go to China, and they were running major intelligence operations out of that consulate. And when countries are kind of opposed to each other, that's exactly what they do. They run spy rings out of consulates. So we'll get into that when we come back.
Back on the Morgan Streetman Show and having, as usual, a fascinating conversation with Rafael Pizano. So good to have you in studio today. And you're educating us on how the Cuban Communist Party is trying to entrench itself into our society and our systems here in the United States of America, specifically in Tampa. And Rafael, I want to ask you a question about a story you shed some light on last time we spoke with you in relation to the Cubans wanting to have a consulate here in the Tampa Bay area. Of course, what is here but CENTCOM? Mm-hmm. And then there's another story that you can share with us about something that happened at Southcom.
When I was appalled about them wanting to open a consulate here, I saw the issue would come up, go away, come up, go away. It's like they were trying to find leverage and they didn't have enough, and they keep bringing it back up. I'm sure it will come up again because it's been going on for years. But the consulate, according to Colonel Rick Simmons, who was our counterintel guy that would work on Cuba, everyone that you talk to, the main way that they try to do things is through consulates or embassies. So there's a proven track record. And then you have Renzo Gonzalez. Renzo Gonzalez served 13, 14 years in a U.S. federal prison. He was convicted, bartered back during the Obama administration. This guy was targeting Southcom. Southcom is just like it's South Florida's version of our CENTCOM. And CENTCOM has all the 5 major branches. It was there during the first Gulf War, General Schwarzkopf. It's a think tank, a critical think tank for the DoD, Department of Defense. While it's not a large base like Fort Bragg, it's not meant to train troops in that type of operation. It's a critical think tank. There's things going on right now in there that we don't know what's going on the other side of the world with special ops missions. So when we have that here, and we've had Southcom targeted and someone sent to prison who was a Cuban spy, have we done our legwork? Has City Council, who's entertained this idea of a consulate, said, hey, well, let's do a risk assessment? And I think that's a parental thing to do. You know what I mean? When we have CENTCOM here. Because a lot of people think, well, we have agencies like the FBI that'll make sure nothing will happen. The FBI doesn't go to City Council and tell them, hey, guys, there's a track record of these guys doing a lot of bad stuff. You might want to think about this. The feds don't do that. No agency does that. They maintain their internal records and they observe things, but why let things get out of control? Why not take the step and ask for a risk assessment?
Well, one of our own in Tampa, one of our own former city council members actually went down to Cuba. Several of them have been, but one of them went down and was photographed with the gentleman that you just mentioned who had spent time in federal prison being a spy for Cuba, and that person was photographed down there. Tell us a little about that. And you can find this, by the way, on all publicly available social media.
Absolutely, and that's why I'm here today, because everything that I'm sharing today, there has been diligent work, and it's all online. You even have our local newspapers here, our major ones in Tampa and St. Pete. You can pull this stuff up. If you put Maria Montes' name, you'll find it. If you put any of this up, you'll find it online to verify it for yourself, so you see how serious it is. This photograph was provided to me because as I work on this and travel to different countries, all this information tends to come my way, and I have to, give it to whoever it pertains to, so to speak, whatever agency. So here you had a former City of Tampa councilwoman that it's a picture of her and Renzo Gonzalez, the guy that did 14 years in U.S. federal prison for targeting Southcom. So why, after the fact that this guy gets released, we know what he was doing in Southcom, do we have a city councilwoman taking a picture in Havana with this guy? Because they give him that red carpet treatment. They start introducing him to people, but the people they're introducing, I mean, come on, it doesn't take a mathematician to put the numbers together here.
Well, and who was that former city councilwoman?
Yoli Chapin. She was on there, I think, 2 terms. Don't quote me on that. But she was there, and she was one of the she was the only advocate for a Cuban consulate and everything in relation to what the Cuban regime needed. If they wanted to push an issue, she'll be there pushing it for them, which I don't understand, because Tampa's just a beautiful growing city, but she was one district member out of 7, small territory she covers. Why are you always raising issues for a foreign country, adversary, but nonetheless a foreign country? What does that have to do with Tampa?
Well, it's like you said last time. I mean, we have enough issues to focus on here in our own city.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of raises a flag when you've got a local politician like that who's suddenly very interested in the activities of a foreign government, bringing a foreign government that we know is a communist government.
Yeah.
No, it's unabashedly communist, and you want to put their consulate here. Mm-hmm. And then she's traveling down there, and now she's being photographed with people. Mm-hmm. We don't know if she knew who she was being photographed with, because, like you said, they put the red carpet treatment on, and maybe she didn't know, but gosh, it surely raises some red flags.
But it definitely goes to naivete, because if you're around people that you don't know, it's definitely that. It's naivete, because I'm not saying that she's necessarily a spy. I would not make that allegation. That's not my intention here. My intention is just to raise awareness for everybody, including herself. Hey, we have to wake up. Look at what you got here. Because if she did take that photograph she didn't know, that concerns me even more.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, it sort of reminds me of the time when Bernie Sanders went over to Russia for his honeymoon, remember, and was photographed drinking vodka, and everybody was singing, no shirts on him. It was just kind of a wild photograph, and you're like, that was compromat. They had brought him over there to specifically compromise him, put him in situations to ultimately be able to blackmail him if necessary.
And it also serves, no matter how innocent he may say it is, you're already being a part of a bigger plan, and you're letting yourself be used like a useful idiot. And I think that's what happens to some of these council members here. You're letting yourself be used. You can say, I'm not doing anything bad. Okay, but you're lending yourself out to be used as a tool.
Yeah.
And state media over there does that. They're like, look, we have a U.S. politician here in Havana taking a picture with our hero spy, and you already start to be used because they tell their state media, starts pumping that to the people. Hey, even American politicians agree with our spy who got busted spying on Southcom. That's why she's here taking a picture with him, because he was right and he's a hero.
Yeah, it's
so
endorsement.
You're letting yourself out. Yeah, you're endorsing. You're being used.
Yeah, a photograph like that, you can project a lot of things. A lot of propaganda can be projected into a photograph like that. Say, oh, well, this person approves of that person. It's just a photograph, right? But then the propaganda machine can take that and really use it. So,
and I covered that specifically, as we just did, on the Tampa Bay Times at that time where she returned.
Yeah.
So it's on there.
Yeah. So, all right. So it's not just city council, and we do have another an actual sitting Tampa City Council member to get to, who we want to talk about, who has some deep involvement with the communist Cuban government. But before we get to there, I mean, they're attacking also businessmen, and by attacking, I don't mean they're getting crosswise with them. They're attacking them. They're targeting them. That's a better word. They're targeting them, and they're trying to befriend them, bring them over, and compromise them, use them, like we've said, kind of as useful idiots to further the goals of the regime. If these people don't know what they're doing, they're useful idiots. If they do know, they're actual communist sympathizers. But either way, they get to the same goal point. So tell us a little bit about somebody here in the local business community who's actually gotten in a lot of trouble for what he's done in Cuba.
Well, let's say a man by the name of Albert Fox. I've been working, having dialogues with different people, and this guy for years has been here in the community. I'm talking about a few decades. He's been under investigation and fined by OFAC, a U.S. federal agency, Office of Foreign Asset Control. It's a pretty serious name, but what they did is they fined him $100K because he was using business licenses to entice businessmen to go on there, and he was filling them out unethically. He was doing what he could to get people down there. That type of unethical behavior, and being around a city councilman and being associates, and both of you trying to get people down there and kind of motivate business investors to go down there, that's a problem, especially when you got OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, throwing you a $100,000 fine. This isn't peanuts anymore. It's serious. Now, the criminal charges, I don't know if he got a good attorney to avoid that part, but that's a big fine. That tells you alone that you have people working unethically at very serious levels.
Well, tell us a little bit about what Al Fox was doing, though, because I want to make sure it's clear to folks, because we just kind of ran through it there. But what was he actually doing? He's a businessman here locally, and he's basically trying to take other business people down there, and then he was caught essentially falsifying some forms.
He falsified forms by licenses with the travel permits that would allow you to travel to Cuba, and he'll adjust them in a way that he can get you in there one way or another. You weren't allowed at certain times to be taking businessmen down to Cuba for this, specifically because it's an adversary and different.
Well, the embargo, right? The Cuban embargo. That's kind of the point.
There's several factors here, but each presidential administration has different regulations that are kind of sped up or slowed down. So you weren't allowed to do that. So what he did is he'll change the pretenses of the trip, of the journey. And one of the very people that went on that trip turned out to submit that information to an agency, and that's what led to the investigation and led to the fine. So why? Why is it so important for this guy to take businessmen down to Cuba? I mean, what's there to invest in Cuba? The average worker makes $30. You got the embargo. There's not real business trade. They owe everybody. Russia forgave $100 million debt not too long ago for them. They just don't produce. It's like investing in the desert for some reason.
Yeah.
What's the point? Because they're trying to gain influence. So if they invite some local businessmen, which are well off, they're semi-respected in the community. They know when they come back, if they have an interest because they got the red carpet treatment and they feel like they're going to be first in line if we do business with Cuba, what happens is their influence gets them a lot of turf here. Remember those low minor league politicians like city councilmen? Now, those city councilmen depend on those investors for their funding and their campaigns and so forth. They're influential. Everything runs off influence in our community, inner circles. So that's how they build their base. And that's how they're trying to do it. Now, most of those businessmen are not only given the red carpet treatment, but they tend to meet a lot of young ladies down there. And I'm not going to give any specific thing on that. Those who have traveled to Cuba, who've been on Baradero, the beach, you see the Bernie Sanders aged male walking down the beach with a 20-year-old girl. It doesn't take a rocket scientist.
You can do the math.
You can do the math. A lot of the stuff is about the exploitation of people because they're in need, and if you take a girl out to eat or you give her a $20 bill, you can take advantage of them. Now, I don't know, my ethics is just, I can't stand that here. We will call statutory rape on certain things, even if it's two young people. You can have a 20-year-old male or 21 with a 17, 18-year-old girl, technically a statutory rape. Here you have 65-year-old men sleeping with 17, 16, 15-year-old girls. And I will tell you, I've heard stories of 14 in a West Tampa restaurant where two people were about to get in a shuffle because somebody was offended that he said the oldest girl he slept with was 15. And anybody who has friends that go to, if you have a Cuban friend, even a coworker, ask him, is it true that some people go down there to really try to sleep with underage girls? Let them tell you. Don't take my word for it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very sad situation down there. I can tell you that. It's a very, very sad situation if you go down there and you visit, because you do see that. You see that. It's in the open, and it's not everywhere, but it's there, and it's disturbing, to say the least. So, all right, well, so Al Fox locally was taking people down there, and again, like you described, is kind of a useful idiot in a sense. But, I mean, it can't be a small thing, right, to get a $100,000 fine.
Not at all. And this person has very deep ties with the regime. When I tell you he has deep ties, that fine is just scratching the surface. This guy's in bed big time with the regime. He's the one that organizes trips. He has direct access to the Cuban government. And whoever has direct access to the Cuban government, you're dealing directly with the intel services.
And he's in tight with an actual sitting city council member right now. Is that correct?
That is very much correct. They've been in cahoots, business, associates for the last probably 10 years at least.
And we're going to get into that in our last segment. That could even serve today as our out there story, because you're not going to believe this, folks, this information that Rafael Pizano is going to bring to you today about a sitting Tampa City Council member who's tied in with the Cuban government and got a lot of ties going back to Cuba. And you just got to scratch your head and ask why. Why is this person so tied in with them, and what's the real goal here? So we're going to jump into that when we come back on the Morgan Streetman Show.
Back on the Morgan Streetman Show, and this is where we love to go out there. But with our special guest today, we're actually staying within the Tampa Bay area with the story you have to share with us. Again, we're speaking with Rafael Pizano. So great to have you and to hear your story. You're so courageous, speaking out against Cuban communism, making sure it doesn't find its way here to our country. And you have a very specific story you can share of something that's alarming that's happening here.
Like I said, it's been unique. All these travels have brought me back home, and there's a lot of it. The spotlight's on Tampa right now, and a lot of people don't see it because they don't see it every day on television, but there's a lot going on right here. This gentleman that I mentioned, this person, the subject who got fined $100,000 by the Foreign Office of Foreign Asset Control, who's his main person here? I mean, this guy's so in bed with the Cuban communists. Who else is working for him? It turns out that it's been an elected official. District 4 for City of Tampa City Council, Bill Carson. Councilman Carson, turns out that he's president of a marketing company. You can check him out online by the name of Tucker Hall. And Tucker Hall has been working under Bill Carson, their Councilman Carson, for many years to gain momentum for the Cuban government here in Tampa. Now, his website's always promoted. If you want to engage Cuba, go through him, go through Tucker Hall. They're ready to put all the connections together. So he has all these connections through Al Fox, the person who was involved in the unethical fine that was given to him. They've been working on this for several years. Every time something's come up with the consulate, there's Bill Carson, the councilman, pushing that. The only resolution that I've seen that he's ever passed through Tampa City Council in a short time there has been to get city council members to pass a resolution to send it to the White House level, saying that they should change all the measures that they have towards Cuba, and they need to change that, and they need to do this and that. Why is a city council member in a small city sending memorandums to the White House for something like that on U.S. international policy? And I found that odd, especially when it's your one district. You're supposed to be covering South Tampa. Why did you go so far south in your district to go all the way to Cuba? So he's been working on that for some time. After last July, where the many people here in our community saw Cuban Americans take to the streets and raise awareness for solidarity, for democracy in Cuba, that was last July, and they were out there for a few weeks. City Council decided, you know what? The writing is on the wall.
Yeah.
And we're the third largest Cuban American exile community. We have a rapidly growing Venezuelan exile community that suffers the same problem caused by this communist regime. Let's send out a message of unity and tell our exile community here that we support them and we support that message that they're advocating for democracy and civil liberties in Cuba. It flew well. Even the mayor supported it and came out and spoke. The only persons that disagreed on it was Bill Carson. Bill Carson wouldn't sign aboard with the message that says, hey, we support we're against the repression that's going on in Cuba. You know, we're all about democracy and civil liberties, and we understand your pain, and you are the third largest exile community right here in Tampa, our home. He wouldn't sign on that. That alone starts to, bring up the mind. If you're a Tampa City Councilman, you're supposed to be, understanding your constituents, your community. Why are you so against this? But at the same time, right after that, the very next day, he took down off Tucker Hall's site the engagement opportunities that he was offering directly with the Cuban government. So that tells you right there, if he passes resolutions which are favorable to the regime, he doesn't connect with members of this community to give a wholesome message, which really is just talking about democracy. Who doesn't love democracy?
Right.
And civil liberties.
Who's against freedom?
Who's against that? I mean, it was a very objective message. We support you. We support your family's right to civil liberties. He wouldn't sign that, plus the resolutions he sent before. I mean, that's
very strange.
It's just strange. And not to mention that in the past, before July of last year, him and Albert Fox brought the Cuban ambassador once again, gave him a tour of City Council, City Hall, introduced some other city council members to push that resolution to then turn around and hand it over to the Cuban ambassador before he left to say, hey, look what I got signed, and we sent it to the White House. Who do you work for? Do you work for South Tampa, your District 4? Do you work for the city of Tampa and the people of Tampa? Or do you work at the behest of a foreign adversary?
Wow. I mean, that's the question. That's a great question. I think you just encapsulated it right there, because you see the activities. Forget what the word, what lip service gets played to different things, but you see the activities. The activities are seeking essentially a resolution from the city of council saying to the federal government, like the federal government's waiting around to hear what the Tampa City Council has to say, saying, hey, put a Cuban consulate here in Tampa, and then you're bringing the Cuban ambassador around, taking him through City Hall, introducing him around to different people. I'm sure that the public introductions were one thing, and then I'm sure there was a whole series of private introductions that probably took place that we would have no record of whatsoever.
But let's go even deeper. There's been private meetings that they've had. Has he released that? Isn't there a sunshine law that says technically you're supposed to release certain things? So if you're talking about business with the city of Cuba, even if it's a consulate, and I've seen Tampa Bay Times articles in the past, even with the former mayor of St. Pete, former mayor, not current mayor of St. Pete, where he boasted in Tampa Times that he had a private 90-minute meeting with Gustavo Machine, the diplomat that was expelled from the U.S., persona non grata, for an espionage ring leading it. And it comes out in the Tampa Bay Times. He had a private 90-minute meeting. Did he submit that to the proper people? Isn't there sunshine laws? Isn't there some kind of federal law you have to say if you had that private meeting? But they mess up themselves and put their foots in their mouth because they boast how he got a private 90-minute meeting. He just made a mistake right there.
Yeah.
Because they're so busy promoting themselves and putting themselves center stage with that red carpet treatment they got in Cuba that they give up all their cards.
Wow. Well, I mean, this is just shocking stuff, really, that we have a sitting city council member in Tampa who's that deeply tied in with the Cuban government. Now, you mentioned something about Tucker Hall, which I think is his marketing agency that he runs.
Been running for over 20 years.
Yeah, Bill Carlson and Al Fox, is he involved with Tucker Hall as well?
I would say probably indirectly. I have to get more records to see what's going on. These guys don't let go of public information requests. I mean, I did one on Yoli Chapin. They gave me a 116-page garbage dump. It was good for a shredder. That's about it. They don't answer questions. They didn't want to answer where her funding came from with that trip because we have information. Possibly some of those trips were funded. And when you're a city elected official, guess what? Any gift over a certain amount, you have to report. There's certain things they're not reporting, and then they do a dump to not give you the information. So that just put up even more flags for us that there's something going on there. So if our listeners that feel on this and see the urgency of it, anyone who's worked prior service military, intel, or just our listeners who are everyday patriots that care what's going on in our community and our nation, I think the echo here is, has the proper steps been taken? Did UT, which is a wonderful university, which I enjoy very much, I work as a fire department near there, did they ask for a risk assessment like the one that I've got from the FBI? Is City Hall still today going to ask for a risk assessment and say, hey, is there a danger with a consulate here or not? I mean, this is what their job is to do.
Yeah, these are questions they better be asking. Well, Rafael, thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate what you've done, standing up, taking a stand, just a regular citizen, folks, just like you, who's done his own research in the public records. He's willing to take a stand for what he believes in, and this is what we need more of in this country, people who are willing to stand up for freedom, stand up against communism, call it what it is, and call it out. And we've got to start doing this. We've got to do our own research, and we've got to identify these people. We know we cannot count on the corporate media to do it because the corporate media is bought and sold, just like so many of our politicians. Folks, thanks for joining us. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.